Conflict has raged near Kyiv, as Ukrainian officials say heavy shelling and threats of Russian air attacks are endangering attempted evacuations of desperate civilians from encircled towns and cities elsewhere. Key points: Ukraine says its forces had put 31 Russian battalion tactical groups out of action. Ukraine says its forces had put 31 Russian battalion tactical groups out of action. More than 2,000 Melitopol residents demanded the release of its mayor, who Ukraine says was kidnapped on Friday by Russian forces. More than 2,000 Melitopol residents demanded the release of its mayor, who Ukraine says was kidnapped on Friday by Russian forces. Ukrainian officials say they had planned to use humanitarian corridors from Mariupol, as well as towns and villages in the regions of Kyiv, Sumy on Saturday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russia was sending in new troops after Ukrainian forces had put 31 of its battalion tactical groups out of action, in what he called Russia's largest army losses in decades. He gave no details, and it was not possible to verify either statement. He also said about 1,300 Ukrainian troops had been so far, and urged the West to get more involved in peace negotiations. The president suggested Russian forces would face a fight to the if they sought to enter the capital. If they decide to carpet Kyiv and simply erase the history of this region, the history of the Kyiv and Rus, the history of Europe, and destroy all of us, then they will enter Kyiv, Mr. Zelensky told a news conference. If that's their goal, let them come in, but they will have to live on this land by themselves. Mr. Zelensky also said he had spoken to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron about pressuring Russia to release the mayor of the city of Melitopol, who Ukraine says was kidnapped on Friday by Russian forces. More than 2,000 residents of the southern city, which is now under Russian control, protested outside the city administration building to demand the release of Mayor Ivan Fedorov, according to Kirilo Tymoshenko, deputy head of the president's office. People protest the abduction of Mayor Ivan Fedorov outside the Melitopol Regional Administration building. Mr. Scholz and Mr. Macron spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin for 75 minutes and demanded an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, a German spokesperson said on Saturday afternoon. A Kremlin statement on the 75-minute call made no mention of a ceasefire, and a French presidency official said, "We did not detect a willingness on Putin's part to end the war." Russia has not commented on the fate of Mr. Fedorov, who Ukrainian officials said was kidnapped by Russian forces on false accusations of terrorism. CCTV footage appears to show Russian forces apprehending Ivan Fedorov, mayor of Melitopol. Mr. Zelensky said his country could not stop fighting, but was upholding a ceasefire around an agreed humanitarian corridor out of the southern port of Mariupol, which has been under an almost 2-week siege, and called on Russia to do the same. Ukraine's intelligence service accused Russia on Saturday of firing at a convoy of civilian evacuees from the village of Peremyha in the Kyiv region, causing 7s. After the attack, the occupiers forced the remnants of the column to turn back to Peremyha and are not letting them out of the village, the intelligence service said in a statement. Moscow has previously blamed Kyiv for failed evacuations. Mr. Putin launched the invasion on February 24 in an operation that has been universally condemned around the world and that has drawn tough Western sanctions on Russia. The armament has trapped thousands of people in besieged cities and sent 2.5 million Ukrainians fleeing to neighboring countries. Conditions in Mariupol grim. Ukrainian officials had planned to use humanitarian corridors from Mariupol, as well as towns and villages in the regions of Kyiv, Sumy and some other areas on Saturday. But the governor of the Kyiv region said fighting and threats of Russian air attacks were continuing during evacuation attempts, and the Donetsk region's governor said constant shelling was complicating bringing aid into Mariupol. Earlier on Saturday, Ukraine said Russian forces had shelled a Mariupol mosque where 86 Turkish nationals, including 34 children, had taken refuge. The mosque of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his wife Roxolana in Mariupol was shelled by Russian invaders, the foreign ministry said in a tweet. Food and water are in short supply in the port city of Mariupol, as residents are repeatedly stopped from attempting to leave the city due to continued shelling. The UN Humanitarian Office said conditions in Mariupol were grim. There are reports of looting and violent confrontations among civilians over what little basic supplies remain in the city, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said. Medicines for life-threatening illnesses are quickly running out, hospitals are only partially functioning, and the food and water are in short supply. People were boiling groundwater for drinking, using wood to cook food and burying bodies near where they lay, a staff member for Doctors Without Borders in the city said. We saw people who, because of lack of medication, he said, adding that many people had also been wounded or neighbors just dig a hole in the ground and put the bodies inside. An advisor to the Ukrainian presidency said earlier that 79 evacuation buses and 2 trucks with humanitarian cargo had left for Sumy on Saturday. Buses and trucks also left Zaporizhia for Mariupol. A video released on social media by the deputy head of the Ukrainian presidential administration showed at least 1,582 civilians in Mariupol have been as a result of Russian shelling and a 12-day blockade, the city council said in an online statement on Friday. It was not possible to verify casualty figures. A man walks amid the debris of a cultural center and an administration building that were destroyed during a raid in the village of besieged outside Kyiv. Air raid sirens blared across most Ukrainian cities on Saturday morning, urging people to seek shelters, local media reported. The exhausted-looking governor of Chernihiv, around 150 kilometers northeast of Kyiv, gave a video update in front of the ruins of its Ukraine hotel, which he said had been hit on Saturday. There is no such hotel anymore, Vyacheslav Chaus said, wiping tears from his eyes. But Ukraine itself still exists, and it will prevail. Russian rocket attacks destroyed a Ukrainian air base and hit an ammunition depot near the town of Vasilkiv in the Kyiv region on Saturday morning, Interfax Ukraine quoted Vasilkiv Mayor Natalia Balasinovich as saying. Moscow has denied targeting civilians in what it calls a special operation to demilitarize Ukraine and unseat leaders it refers to as neo-Nazis. It has not responded to Ukrainian challenges to provide evidence. Ukrainian forces continue to hold the capital Kyiv, as Russian troops continue to try and encircle the city. Ukraine braces for new wave of attacks. Ukraine said it expected a new wave of attacks on the regions around the capital Kyiv, the country's second city Kharkiv, and Donbass in the east, where Russian-backed separatists have expanded their control. Britain's defense ministry said on Friday that Russian forces could launch an offensive on Kyiv in a few days. In an update on Saturday, it said fighting northwest of the capital continued, with the bulk of Russian ground forces 25 kilometers from the center. The cities of Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Mariupol remained encircled under heavy Russian shelling, and Russian forces had captured the eastern outskirts of Mariupol, it said. Close Russian ally Belarus said it was sending 5 battalion tactical groups to its border with Ukraine, but had no plans to send troops in to help Russian forces fighting there. A top Ukrainian security official on Friday warned Belarus not to send troops to Ukraine, saying Ukraine was showing restraint towards Belarus despite the country being used as a launching pad for Russian planes. Belarus Chief of General Staff Viktor Gulevich said the battalion tactical groups would replace forces already stationed near the border. I want to underline that the transfer of troops is in no way connected with any preparation, and especially not with the participation of Belarusian soldiers in the special military operation on the territory of Ukraine, Mr. Gulevich said. Russia repeatedly denied any plan to invade Ukraine before it invaded by land, air and sea. People stand in front of a destroyed shoe factory in the aftermath of a missile attack in Dnipro, Ukraine. Russian occupying forces are planning to stage a pseudo-referendum in the southern Ukrainian port city of Kherson to create a breakaway region, the deputy head of the local council said on Saturday. The creation of the will turn our region into a hopeless hole without life or a future, Sergei Klan said in a post on social media. Russian forces captured Kherson following the start of an invasion